Colorado Territory, 1876. The rugged frontier where fortunes were made from silver mines and cattle ranches, where men outnumbered women 5-1, and where age was measured not in years, but in hardships endured. For women back east facing spinsterhood and financial ruin, the promise of a new beginning led many to answer advertisements for mail-order brides. But what happens when the woman who steps off the stagecoach carries the wisdom of 45 years rather than the bloom of youth? This is the story of Victoria Harrington, whose silver-streaked hair and life-lined face caused 3 prospective husbands to send her back before she'd even unpacked her trunk, until she met Emmett Sullivan, a rancher whose own silver hair crowned 6 decades of hard-won experience, and who recognized that in a land that forgave no mistakes, wisdom might be the most precious resource of all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stagecoach rattled over the final ridge before Clearwater Junction, the April sun illuminating the scattered buildings of the frontier town nestled in the valley below. Victoria Harrington pressed a handkerchief to her mouth, attempting to filter the dust that had been her constant companion for the past 3 days of travel. At 45, she had long since abandoned vanity, but she still retained enough pride to wish she could arrive looking somewhat presentable. The other passengers, 2 miners, a traveling salesman, and a young woman clutching a baby, had gradually ceased their curious glances as the journey progressed. At first, they had openly wondered what brought a respectable-looking woman of her age to the Colorado Territory alone. Victoria had volunteered no explanations, and frontier etiquette eventually discouraged further inquiry. Only the young mother, Betsy, had formed a tentative connection during the journey, perhaps recognizing a maternal quality in Victoria that promised safety rather than judgment. "We're nearly there," Betsy murmured, nodding toward the town growing larger through the window. "Are you meeting someone, Ma'am?" Victoria nodded, smoothing her travel-worn skirt. "A Mr. Howard Green. He owns the Mercantile, I understand." Something flickered in the young woman's eyes. Recognition followed by what might have been pity. Before Victoria could inquire further, the stagecoach lurched to a halt in front of the station, a weathered wooden building that served as both transportation hub and mail office for Clearwater Junction. "End of the line for Clearwater," the driver called, already climbing down to retrieve luggage. Victoria gathered her reticule and straightened her hat, a modest affair that had seen better days, but still conveyed respectability. She had sold nearly everything to finance this journey. Her late parents' home in Philadelphia, most of her belongings, even her mother's cherished silver tea service. All that remained was packed in 2 trunks and a carpet bag containing practical clothing, a few books, her sewing notions, and the medical supplies she had accumulated during years of caring for her ailing parents. As a spinster daughter who had devoted 20 years to nursing her mother through consumption and her father through heart failure, Victoria possessed neither wealth nor matrimonial prospects in Philadelphia. When both parents passed within months of each other, leaving nothing but debts and memories, she had faced a stark reality: become a charity case dependent on distant relatives or forge an entirely new path. The advertisement in the Eastern Star had seemed like providence. Respectable businessman seeks educated lady of good character as wife. Must be skilled in household management and of sufficient maturity to adapt to frontier life. Age 25-35 preferred. Will provide comfortable home and secure future in growing Colorado town. Correspondence and references required. Victoria had been frank about her age in her letters, but Howard Green's responses had been encouraging. He described himself as 40, never married, and desirous of a sensible companion rather than a frivolous young bride. Her references from the pastor and doctor in Philadelphia had apparently satisfied his concerns about her character. After 3 months of correspondence, he had sent train and stagecoach fare, along with instructions to arrive by the first week of April. Now, as she descended from the stagecoach, Victoria scanned the small crowd gathered at the station. A man stepped forward, younger than she had expected, perhaps 35 rather than 40, with a neat brown beard and fashionable attire that set him apart from the roughly dressed miners and ranchers. "Miss Harrington?" he inquired, his smile faltering slightly as he took in her appearance. "Mr. Green, I presume," Victoria responded, extending her gloved hand. "How do you do?" He took her hand briefly, his gaze darting over her grey-streaked brown hair and the fine lines around her eyes. Something like dismay crossed his features before he composed himself. "Welcome to Clearwater Junction. I trust your journey was not too arduous." "As comfortable as one might expect," Victoria replied diplomatically, noticing his continued scrutiny. "The stagecoach was quite full, but my fellow travellers were considerate." Howard nodded distractedly, gesturing toward her luggage being unloaded. "Is this all you've brought?" "Yes, I believed it prudent to pack practically." "Indeed." He signaled to a boy lounging nearby. "Jimmy, take Miss Harrington's trunks to Mrs. Wallace's boarding house." He turned back to Victoria. "I've arranged temporary lodging for you. We can discuss arrangements further after you've had an opportunity to rest and refresh yourself." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Victoria noted the careful phrasing. Temporary lodging rather than his home, arrangements rather than wedding plans. Something had changed since his letters, and she suspected it was his discovery that 45 in correspondence translated to silver hair and lines of experience in person. Mrs. Wallace's boarding house proved to be a tidy 2-story structure at the respectable end of Main Street. The landlady, a brisk widow of perhaps 50, showed Victoria to a small but clean room on the 2nd floor. "Mr. Green has paid for 1 week," Mrs. Wallace informed her, with a measured glance that suggested she understood exactly what Victoria's situation might be. "Supper's at 6 sharp. Bathhouse is out back, hot water available on Wednesdays, and Saturdays for an extra 25 cents. After unpacking her essentials and washing away the worst of the travel dust, Victoria found herself seated in the boarding house parlour, awaiting Howard Green's return. He had promised to call for her at 5 o'clock to show her around the town. Mrs. Wallace appeared with tea, her expression softening somewhat. "First time in Colorado territory?" "Yes," Victoria acknowledged. "It's quite different from Philadelphia." Came as a mail-order bride, I expect?" The directness was startling but not unkind. Victoria saw no reason to dissemble. "Mr. Green and I have corresponded, yes." Mrs. Wallace nodded. "He's done well with the mercantile. Took it over from old man Peterson 2 years ago, expanded the inventory, brought in more refined goods." She paused. "He's been particular about finding a wife. Had 2 ladies come out before you. Neither stayed above a fortnight." The implication hung in the air. Victoria sipped her tea, considering her response. "I see. Did they find the territory unsuitable?" "Territory was fine," Mrs. Wallace replied dryly. "It was the match that didn't take. First one was too plain for his liking. Second talked too much." She eyed Victoria speculatively. "He's got notions about having the perfect wife to help him climb the social ladder. Clearwater's growing. He means to grow with it." Before Victoria could respond, a knock at the door announced Howard's arrival. He escorted her through the town, pointing out the establishments with proprietorial pride: the mercantile, his own impressively stocked, the assay office, the bank, 2 competing hotels catering to the influx of mining investors, and the newly constructed church where all the better families worship. Throughout the tour, Victoria noted his careful distance, the way he spoke of the town's prospects rather than their potential future together. By the time he returned her to the boarding house for supper, she had reached the inevitable conclusion. "Miss Harrington," he said stiffly at the door, "I feel I must be candid. While your letters suggested a suitable temperament and background, I find that is to say, my business requires a certain impression." "You find me older than you anticipated," Victoria finished for him, sparing them both the awkward circumlocution. Howard had the grace to flush slightly. "Please understand, appearances matter greatly in my position. Clearwater Junction is evolving from a mining camp to a proper town. The mercantile serves our finest families. My wife must reflect the establishment's quality and future prospects." Victoria regarded him steadily, dignity intact despite the humiliation burning beneath her composed exterior. "You specified maturity in your advertisement, Mr. Green." "Yes, but within reason," he replied, discomfort evident in his shifting gaze. "The women here, many are quite young, you understand. A wife significantly older than myself would appear unusual." "I see." Victoria maintained her composure through years of practice managing difficult situations. "What do you propose?" Relief flickered across his features. "I've paid for a week's lodging. That should provide ample time for you to consider options. The eastbound stage departs every Thursday. Perhaps returning to Philadelphia would be best. My home there has been sold, as you know." Howard shifted uncomfortably. "There is another possibility. Thomas Everett, the blacksmith, lost his wife last winter. He has 4 children and desperately needs a woman to manage his household. He might consider an arrangement." The suggestion, being passed along to a widower desperate enough to overlook her age, struck Victoria like a physical blow, though she allowed no reaction to show on her face. "I will consider my options, Mr. Green. Thank you for your candor." That night, alone in her narrow boarding house bed, Victoria permitted herself the tears she had restrained during the humiliating encounter. She had liquidated her entire past, traveled thousands of miles, only to be judged and dismissed based on silver strands and laugh lines. The bitter irony that her excessive age was largely the result of 2 decades spent in selfless care of others was not lost on her. Morning brought clarity, if not comfort. Victoria had never been one to wallow in self-pity. After breakfast, she requested directions to the blacksmith shop from Mrs. Wallace, whose knowing look contained surprisingly little judgment. "Thought you might head that way," the landlady commented. "Everett's a decent sort, works hard, children are wild. As March hares, though, with no mother's hand to guide them." Thomas Everett proved to be a massive man with forearms like tree trunks and a soot-smudged face that made his age difficult to determine, somewhere between 35 and 45, Victoria guessed. He listened to her direct inquiry about his need for a housekeeper or wife with transparent shock at her forthrightness. "Ma'am, that is, He glanced around the smithy as if seeking escape, then sighed heavily. "It's true I'm in desperate straits with the children, but I can't offer much beyond room and board. Business has been slow since the Peterson mine closed." Victoria appreciated his honesty, if nothing else. "Would you like to consider a trial arrangement? I'm a capable housekeeper and experienced, with basic nursing and education." Hope and wariness warred on his face. "The children are a handful. My oldest, Lily, is 12 going on 20, and the boys, 8, 6, and 4, are more wild than tame." "I understand. Perhaps I could meet them before either of us decides." The Everett home was a small cabin at the edge of town. Its neglected, state evident in the patched roof, cluttered yard, and broken front step. Inside was worse. Dishes piled in the dry sink, clothing scattered across furniture, and a layer of dust thick enough to write in. The four children regarded Victoria with suspicious eyes as their father made awkward introductions. Lily, the oldest, wore a threadbare dress and an expression of premature adulthood. The boys, James, William, and little Caleb, seemed united in defensive wariness. "Are you going to be our new mother?" Lily demanded, direct as only children can be. "I'm considering helping your father with the household," Victoria replied carefully. "The last lady ran away after 2 days," James volunteered. "Said we were savages." "James!" Thomas reprimanded, embarrassment coloring his face. Victoria spent the afternoon observing the chaos of the Everett household, occasionally intervening when the youngest boy's antics threatened injury. By supper time, she had organized enough to produce a simple meal from the meager and disorganized pantry supplies. As Thomas escorted her back to the boarding house that evening, he seemed both grateful and doubtful. "You've worked miracles today, Miss Harrington, but I want to be honest. This isn't the life a lady like you deserves. The work is endless, the children difficult, and I can't offer proper marriage, just partnership. Times are too lean for anything else." Victoria understood the implication. He needed a housekeeper and mother for his children, not a wife in any meaningful sense. The arrangement would be one of necessity rather than choice, her age making her suitable for the role precisely because he could not imagine her as a true companion. "Thank you for your candor, Mr. Everett. I'll consider your situation." The next morning brought another possibility via Mrs. Wallace, who mentioned that Judge Wilson, the town's most prominent citizen, was seeking a housekeeper for his impressive residence on the hill overlooking Clearwater. "Pays well, but he's particular," the landlady warned. "Widower, no children at home. Previous housekeeper left to marry a rancher last month." Judge Ambrose Wilson proved to be a corpulent man in his 60s, with an authoritative manner and a house filled with pretensions to Eastern refinement. He interviewed Victoria in his study, assessing her with the same measuring gaze he likely employed in his courtroom. "You're educated, I understand? Familiar with proper household management and social requirements?" he inquired, making notes on a pad as she responded. "Yes, sir. I managed my parents' household in Philadelphia for many years, including hosting appropriate social functions for my father's business associates." He regarded her speculatively. "You're older than I expected from Green's description, but that may be advantageous. No risk of impropriety with a mature woman managing a widower's household. The position pays $15 monthly, with room and board. Thursdays off, unless I'm entertaining." It was a reasonable offer, certainly better financially than Thomas Everett's desperate proposal. Victoria would have security, comfortable accommodation, and respectable employment. What she would not have was equality or the opportunity for a genuine new beginning. She would be a servant in a fine house rather than a partner in building something of her own. "I'll need references, of course," the judge continued, clearly assuming her acceptance, "and you must understand that as my housekeeper, your conduct reflects upon my position. No gentleman callers, no frivolous socializing." "I understand the requirements of such a position," Victoria replied carefully. "May I have a day to consider your generous offer?" The judge frowned slightly, apparently unaccustomed to hesitation, before his condescension. "As you wish, though I should mention that several other candidates have expressed interest." That evening, Mrs. Wallace delivered a note from Howard Green, requesting Victoria's company for supper the following day. "Seems your Mr. Green has had second thoughts," the landlady observed. "Perhaps he's reconsidered after hearing Judge Wilson's interest." Indeed, during their meal at the hotel restaurant, Howard was noticeably more attentive, inquiring about her impressions of Clearwater and outlining his plans for expanding the mercantile. "I've been considering our situation, Miss Harrington," he finally stated, setting down his coffee cup. "While our initial meeting was Not what either of us expected. I wonder if we might reconsider an arrangement. Your dignified manner and obvious capabilities would be assets to the business. Victoria regarded him steadily. Have you overcome your concerns about my age, Mr. Green? He shifted uncomfortably. I've reflected on the practical advantages. Your maturity lends a certain gravity that younger women often lack. And I understand Judge Wilson has offered you a position which suggests your qualifications are recognized. The mercantile owner was reconsidering her not because he valued her, Victoria realized, but because he feared losing her capable management to a competitor for social standing. She would be an asset to his business, nothing more, valued for her utility rather than herself. You're very practical, Mr. Green, she observed. He smiled, mistaking her comment for approval. Indeed, in business and in life, practical considerations must prevail over sentiment. By the time he escorted her back to the boarding house, Howard had outlined a modified proposal, a month's trial period working in the mercantile, after which they would reassess the possibility of marriage. The arrangement would provide him the benefit of her capabilities without immediate commitment. 3 days in Clearwater Junction had presented Victoria with 3 offers, each more demeaning than the last. Howard wanted her skills, but found her age embarrassing. Thomas Everett needed a mother for his children, but couldn't afford the dignity of formal marriage. Judge Wilson would pay her fairly, but expected subservience and isolation in return. None saw Victoria herself. The woman who had nursed her parents through long illnesses without complaint, who had managed a household through financial hardship with ingenuity and grace, who had educated herself through books when formal schooling, was unavailable to her. They saw only a woman too old for proper marriage, useful perhaps, but never truly desired as a partner. On her 4th morning in Clearwater, as Victoria sat in the boarding house parlour, contemplating her dwindling options, Mrs. Wallace appeared, with a letter. Came on yesterday's stage, the landlady explained, got mixed in with the general delivery. The envelope bore Victoria's name in unfamiliar handwriting, with the boarding house as the address. Inside was a brief message. Miss Harrington, word reaches me that you have arrived in Clearwater Junction seeking prospects, but finding limited welcome. If you are not yet committed to arrangements there, I would be pleased to discuss a different possibility at my ranch 15 miles north. The Rocking S offers a respectable home and genuine partnership to a woman of mature years and practical capabilities who values substance over appearance. My foreman, Caleb Tucker, will await your response at the Clearwater stage office on Thursday morning. Should you wish to consider my proposition, he will escort you to the ranch for conversation without obligation. Respectfully, Emmett Sullivan, Rocking S Ranch, Victoria, stared at the unexpected missive, confusion and cautious interest mingling. "Do you know of this Mr. Sullivan?" she asked Mrs. Wallace. The landlady nodded slowly. "Emmett Sullivan's one of the oldest settlers in these parts. Came in 59 during the gold rush, found silver instead, used the profits to build one of the finest cattle operations in the territory. Keeps to himself mostly, but has a reputation for fair dealing." "And he's seeking a wife?" Victoria asked, the letter's careful phrasing leaving the exact nature of the proposition uncertain. "His wife Sarah passed near 3 years ago. Pneumonia, I heard. They were married 30 years or more." Mrs. Wallace paused thoughtfully. "Can't say I've heard he was looking to remarry, but it would make sense. Ranch that size needs a hand. How would he have heard of me?" Mrs. Wallace smiled slightly. "Clearwater thrives on information, Miss Harrington. Your arrival, Green's reaction, your visits to Everett and Judge Wilson, all discussed thoroughly at the Silver Dollar. By sundown each day, Sullivan's ranch hands come to town for supplies twice weekly." Victoria considered the letter again. Unlike Howard's original advertisement, this invitation specifically mentioned mature years as a quality sought rather than a drawback to be tolerated. After 3 rejections, such appreciation, even from an unknown source, stirred something, long dormant within her. "What manner of man is he?" she asked. "Sullivan? Must be past 60 now. Silver-haired and weather-beaten as an old saddle, but stands straight as a pine. Not what you'd call handsome, but has a dignity about him. Built that ranch from nothing, they say. Lost his right leg below the knee in a mining accident decades back. Gets around with a wooden one so well most folks forget it's there." A silver-haired rancher with a wooden leg, seeking a silver-haired woman with no dowry but her wisdom and capability. There was something almost poetic about the symmetry, though Victoria was far too practical to indulge in romantic notions after the disappointments of the past days. Yet as she retired that night, Victoria found herself considering the possibility with growing resolution. She had liquidated her life in Philadelphia and traveled west, seeking not just security, but purpose, a place where her capabilities and experience would be valued rather than taken for granted or dismissed. None of her prospects in Clearwater offered that fundamental respect. Perhaps, she thought as sleep finally claimed her, there was wisdom in meeting a man who specifically sought what others rejected, a woman whose silver hair reflected not just age, but a lifetime of earned insight. At minimum, the invitation offered a dignified alternative to accepting the lesser arrangements Clearwater had presented. Come morning, Victoria had made her decision. She wrote 3 brief, polite notes declining the offers from Howard Green, Thomas Everett, and Judge Wilson. Then she packed her trunks and requested Mrs. Wallace arrange transportation to the stage office for Thursday morning. "You're going to Sullivan's, then?" the landlady asked, a hint of approval in her tone. "I'm going to have a conversation," Victoria corrected, "without obligation, as his letter states." Mrs. Wallace nodded. "Smart approach, but I'll say this. In my experience, a man who values wisdom enough to seek it rather than youth is rare as hen's teeth on the frontier. Might be worth hearing what Emmett Sullivan has to say." Thursday morning dawned clear and crisp, the spring sunshine illuminating the mountains surrounding Clearwater Junction. As Victoria sat on her trunk outside the stage office, she felt a curious blend of trepidation and anticipation. At 45, she had long since abandoned girlish dreams, yet here she was, waiting to meet a stranger who might see value where others saw only years. A wagon approached, driven by a weathered man of perhaps 50. He brought the team to a halt before her and tipped his hat respectfully. "Miss Harrington, Caleb Tucker, foreman at the Rocking S. Mr. Sullivan sent me to fetch you, if you're of a mind to come." Victoria studied him, finding steady reliability in his direct gaze. "I've agreed to a conversation, Mr. Tucker. Nothing more." He nodded, helping her aboard and carefully loading her trunks. "Mr. Sullivan was clear on that point, ma'am. Said to tell you that the stage passes by our north boundary every Tuesday, should you wish to continue your journey afterward." As the wagon pulled away from Clearwater Junction, Victoria felt the stares of townspeople, Howard Green visible in the mercantile doorway, Judge Wilson pausing on the boardwalk, even young Lily Everett watching solemnly from the smithy. Behind her lay rejection and limited prospects. Ahead lay uncertainty, but also the possibility, however slim, that her years might finally be seen not as a liability, but as the valuable resource they truly were. For the first time since arriving in Colorado territory, Victoria felt something unfamiliar unfurling within her spirit. The journey to the Rocking S Ranch took nearly 3 hours, the wagon climbing steadily into the foothills where the high mountain valley opened before them. Victoria watched the landscape transform from the dusty scrubland around Clearwater Junction to pine-covered slopes and finally lush pastureland dotted with grazing cattle. Spring had arrived earlier in this sheltered valley, painting the meadows, with wildflowers and fresh green grass. "Beautiful country," she remarked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between her and Caleb Tucker. "Mr. Sullivan chose well," the foreman agreed. "Most folks rushed for the mining claims, closer to the mountains, but he saw the value in good grazing land with reliable water. As they crested a final rise, the ranch headquarters came into view, a substantial two-story house built of squared logs and local stone, with a wide porch wrapping around two sides. Several outbuildings formed a neat cluster nearby: barn, bunkhouse, smokehouse, and what appeared to be a workshop. Unlike the hastily constructed buildings of Clearwater Junction, these structures suggested permanence and careful planning. "Mr. Sullivan built the main house himself," Caleb offered, noting her interest. "Started with just 2 rooms 20 years ago. Added on as the ranch prospered. Mrs. Sullivan designed the rose garden on the south side." The mention of the late Mrs. Sullivan sent a flutter of uncertainty through Victoria. Following in another woman's footsteps, particularly one who had shared 30 years with the man in question, presented its own challenges. As the wagon approached, Victoria noticed a tall figure emerge onto the porch. Even at a distance, Emmett Sullivan cut an imposing figure, broad-shouldered despite his age, with a straight posture that belied his years. His hair caught the sunlight, pure silver against the weathered tan of his face. Caleb brought the wagon to a halt at the base of the porch steps. Before he could descend to assist her, Emmett Sullivan was already making his way down to ground level. Victoria noted the slight irregularity in his gait, the wooden leg Mrs. Wallace had mentioned, but was struck by the fluid ease of his movement, suggesting years of adaptation had rendered the disability almost irrelevant. "Miss Harrington," he greeted her, his voice deep and clear, "welcome to the Rocking S. I'm Emmett Sullivan." Up close, Victoria could see the years etched into his face, the sun creases around remarkably blue eyes, the strong lines carved by weather and experience. Not handsome in the conventional sense, but possessed of a dignity and strength that commanded attention. Mrs. Wallace's assessment, silver-haired and weather-beaten as an old saddle, was accurate but insufficient. "Mr. Sullivan," she acknowledged, accepting his assistance from the wagon. His hand was work-roughened, but his touch surprisingly gentle. "Thank you for your invitation. The pleasure is mine." He gestured toward the house. "You must be tired after your journey. Mrs. Gunderson has prepared refreshments, and a room is ready should you wish to rest before we talk." The unexpected consideration, recognizing her comfort before pressing his own interests, registered with Victoria. After days of being assessed like merchandise by Howard Green, Thomas Everett, and Judge Wilson, such thoughtfulness was noteworthy. Mrs. Gunderson proved to be a stout Norwegian woman of perhaps 60 who managed the ranch's cooking and some of the household duties. She welcomed Victoria with brisk efficiency, showing her to a pleasant bedroom on the second floor where a basin of warm water awaited. "Mr. Sullivan said you might want to freshen up," Mrs. Gunderson explained. "I've put coffee and sandwiches in the parlor when you're ready. Take your time." The room was simple but comfortable. A maple bed with a colorful quilt, a small writing desk beneath the window, a rocking chair with a crocheted cushion, and a sturdy wardrobe. What struck Victoria most was the cleanliness and order. Unlike the chaotic Everett household or the stuffy formality of Judge Wilson's residence, this room felt genuinely welcoming. After washing away the dust of travel and changing into a fresh shirtwaist, Victoria made her way downstairs. The main floor of the Sullivan home revealed similar attention to practical comfort. Solid furniture built for use rather than show, wide windows capturing mountain views, bookshelves filled with actual books rather than decorative volumes. She found Emmett Sullivan in the parlor, rising courteously as she entered. He indicated the coffee service on a side table. "Please help yourself. Mrs. Gunderson makes excellent sandwiches. though she insists American bread is inferior to Norwegian. The small joke, delivered with dry humor, eased some of Victoria's tension. As she prepared her coffee, she was conscious of his gaze, not the assessing scrutiny she had endured from Howard Green, but something more measured and respectful. "You have a beautiful home, Mr. Sullivan," she offered, taking a seat in a comfortable chair near the window. "Thank you. It's evolved over the years, much like the ranch itself." He settled across from her, his wooden leg extended slightly. "I imagine you have questions about my letter and why I sent it." Victoria appreciated his directness. "Indeed, it was quite unexpected, especially as we've never met." Emmett nodded. "My approach was unconventional, I admit. Perhaps I should explain." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "Mrs. Gunderson's nephew works at the Silver Dollar in Clearwater. He mentioned a woman of mature years who had arrived as a potential bride for Howard Green, only to find herself redirected to less desirable situations." Victoria felt heat rise in her cheeks, imagining her circumstances discussed in a saloon. "I see." "Forgive me," he said quickly, reading her discomfort. "Small communities thrive on information, not always accurately conveyed. What caught my attention wasn't the gossip, but the description of a dignified, capable woman being undervalued for the very qualities that should recommend her." His blunt assessment disarmed her embarrassment. "Age is not highly prized in a prospective bride, Mr. Sullivan." "Perhaps not by fools," he replied simply, "but I've lived long enough to value substance over surface. Years aren't a liability, Miss Harrington. They're an education, if properly applied." The sentiment, expressed without flattery or condescension, resonated deeply. Victoria studied him more carefully. "You mentioned a proposition in your letter. I'd appreciate clarity about your intentions." Emmett Sullivan smiled slightly, appreciation rather than amusement in his expression. "Direct and forthright? Good." He set his coffee cup aside. "Here's my situation, plainly stated. I built this ranch from nothing into one of the most successful operations in the territory. I intend it as a legacy for my nephew's children, as I have none of my own. But at 62, I find myself unable to manage both the cattle operation and the household duties once shared with my late wife." He gestured around the room. "Mrs. Gunderson is an excellent cook, but returns to her family in Denver each winter. The ranch needs a permanent mistress, someone with the judgment to manage household affairs, the dignity to represent the rocking S in business matters when necessary, and the practical wisdom that comes from life experience. And you believe I possess these qualities based on saloon gossip?" Victoria couldn't keep the skepticism from her voice. "Based on your letters to Howard Green," he corrected, "which he was indiscreet enough to share with Judge Wilson while considering your suitability." Victoria's eyes widened. "He showed my private correspondence?" "Not intentionally to me," Emmett clarified, "but the judge mentioned the quality of your expression and practical outlook when we discussed legal matters regarding water rights. It piqued my interest." "So you arranged to meet me through an intermediary, rather than approaching directly in town," Victoria surmised, finding the pieces falling into place. "I thought you might appreciate the privacy," he acknowledged, "and the opportunity to consider, without the eyes of Clearwater upon you. If my approach was presumptuous, I apologize." Victoria found herself reassessing the man before her. His methods were unorthodox, but demonstrated consideration for her dignity, something notably absent in her previous encounters. "What exactly are you proposing, Mr. Sullivan?" "A marriage of equals," he replied without hesitation. "I offer financial security, a comfortable home, and partnership in managing the rocking S. You would have authority over household matters, access to ranch accounts for necessary expenditures, and the respect due to the mistress of a significant property. The directness was refreshing after Howard Green's vacillations and Judge Wilson's condescension. Still, Victoria had learned caution through difficult experience. And what would you expect in return? Practical management of the household, occasional hospitality for business associates, a rational voice in ranch decisions. He paused. And companionship, Miss Harrington. Not romance at our age, perhaps, but the comfort of shared meals, conversation, and purpose. Victoria considered his words carefully. You've presented a sensible arrangement, Mr. Sullivan, but marriage is a significant commitment. Wouldn't a housekeeper serve your practical needs just as effectively? A housekeeper works for wages, he replied. I'm seeking a partner with genuine investment in the ranch's success and future. That requires the legal and social standing of a wife, not an employee. His reasoning was sound, yet Victoria remained cautious. 3 disappointments in Clearwater had reinforced the vulnerability of her position as a woman, alone on the frontier. I appreciate your candor, she said finally, but I would need to know more about the ranch, your expectations, and whether we are compatible in temperament before considering such an arrangement. Emmett nodded, satisfaction rather than disappointment in his expression. A prudent approach. I propose a 2-week acquaintance period. You stay as our guest, observe ranch operations, and we determine if a more permanent arrangement would be beneficial to both parties. Should you decide against it, I'll personally ensure your safe return to Clearwater or transportation to Denver, according to your preference. The offer was fair, more than fair, considering her dwindling resources and limited options. Yet, Victoria was determined to maintain her dignity and independence, regardless of circumstances. And where would I stay during this trial period? Here in the main house, with Mrs. Gunderson as companion for propriety, he answered promptly. The blue room, where you refreshed yourself earlier, is yours for as long as you choose to stay. Victoria considered the proposal. 2 weeks of respectable accommodation and consideration, with guaranteed transportation afterward if needed, represented security she hadn't possessed since leaving Philadelphia. Very well, Mr. Sullivan. I accept your invitation to stay temporarily, while we assess compatibility, but I want to be useful during that time, not merely decorative. A genuine smile transformed his weathered features. Miss Harrington, I would never mistake you for decoration. Your practicality is precisely what interests me. He rose. Now, would you care to see more of the ranch? I find it helps to understand a place by walking its grounds. The remainder of the afternoon passed in a tour of the rocking S. Emmett proved to be a knowledgeable guide, explaining ranch operations with clarity that assumed her intelligence rather than talking down to her. Victoria noted his evident pride in what he had built, not boastful, but the justified satisfaction of a man who had created something substantial through vision and perseverance. The ranch employed 8 full-time hands, with additional workers hired during spring calving and fall roundup. An elaborate irrigation system channeled mountain snowmelt to ensure green pastures even during dry summers. The cattle, a carefully developed crossbreed combining hardiness and beef quality, numbered over 2,000 head. Most ranchers focus solely on quantity, Emmett explained, as they watched a group of cows with young calves. I've found selective. Breeding for quality brings better returns, even with smaller herds. It requires more attention and record-keeping, but the results justify the effort. Victoria recognized the philosophy that likely permeated all his endeavors: quality over quantity, substance over appearance, careful planning over hasty expansion. It aligned with her own approach to life's challenges. As they returned to the house for supper, she found herself genuinely impressed not just by the ranch's prosperity, but by the evident respect Emmett commanded from his workers. Each hand they encountered greeted him with deference, lacking the fearful obsequiousness she had observed in Judge Wilson's household staff. Over the simple but excellent meal prepared by Mrs. Gunderson, conversation flowed more easily than Victoria had anticipated. Emmett inquired about her life in Philadelphia with genuine interest, listening attentively to her descriptions of caring for her parents through extended illnesses. "That requires fortitude," he observed. "Many would have sought escape from such responsibility." "They were my parents," Victoria replied simply. "One does what is necessary for family." He nodded. "A principle that extends to all worthwhile endeavors, I find. My father died in a mining accident when I was 14. Mother and I managed a small farm in Missouri until she remarried 3 years later. I learned early that regardless of circumstances, moving forward is the only viable option." As darkness fell, Mrs. Gunderson served coffee in the parlor before discreetly retiring to her own quarters adjacent to the kitchen. Victoria found herself relaxing into the comfortable chair, the tension of recent days gradually dissipating in the peaceful atmosphere. "May I ask about your late wife?" she ventured, aware the question might touch sensitive terrain, but necessary. For understanding the household she was considering joining. Emmett's expression softened. Sarah was remarkable, intelligent, determined, unafraid of frontier challenges. "We met in Denver when I was recovering from this." He gestured toward his wooden leg. "She was the physician's daughter, brought me books during recuperation, said if I was going to lie abed for weeks, I might as well improve my mind." Victoria smiled at the image. "She sounds formidable." She was. Pride mingled with old sorrow in his voice. "We built this place together. Her touches remain throughout, the rose garden, the library collection, even the design of the irrigation system. She had studied natural sciences before moving west." "You must miss her greatly," Victoria observed gently. "Every day," he acknowledged without self-pity. "But life continues. The ranch requires management. Decisions must be made. Sarah would have been the first to insist on practical forward movement." His matter-of-fact acceptance of grief, while refusing to be defined by it, resonated with Victoria. She had experienced similar emotions after her parents' deaths. Sorrow coexisting with the necessity of continuing life's journey. As the evening concluded, Emmett escorted her to the foot of the staircase. "Rest well, Miss Harrington. Tomorrow, if you're amenable, Mrs. Gunderson can acquaint you with household operations. I have business in the north pasture, but will return by supper." "That would be most helpful," Victoria agreed. "Good night, Mr. Sullivan." In the privacy of the blue room, Victoria sat at the small desk and recorded her impressions of the day in her journal. The Rocking-ess offered what none of her Clearwater prospects had: respect for her capabilities, appreciation for her maturity, and the possibility of genuine partnership rather than servitude disguised as matrimony. Yet caution remained. 1 day of cordial interaction couldn't erase the vulnerability of her situation or the significance of committing herself to life on an isolated ranch with a man she barely knew, however favorable her initial impressions. The following days established a rhythm that allowed Victoria to observe ranch operations while gradually assuming household responsibilities. Mrs. Gunderson proved a willing mentor, introducing her to the organization of pantries, linen closets, and account books with surprising thoroughness. "Mr. Sullivan runs tight ship," the Norwegian woman explained. "Everything has place and purpose, no waste, no disorder." Victoria appreciated the efficiency, finding it aligned with her own methodical nature. The household accounts particularly captured her attention. Meticulous records of expenditures balanced against ranch income, with careful allocations for necessary improvements and reserves for lean seasons. When she commented on the comprehensive bookkeeping, Mrs. Gunderson smiled knowingly. was Mrs. Sullivan's system. She had head for numbers, that one. Mr. Sullivan kept it same after she passed. Says good management requires clear accounting. Victoria found herself naturally adapting to the rhythm of ranch life. She rose early, took breakfast with Emmett and the foreman as they discussed daily operations, then divided her time between household management and learning the broader workings of the cattle operation. Evenings brought supper, followed by conversation. In the parlour, sometimes including Caleb Tucker or Mrs. Gunderson, but often just Victoria and Emmett discussing books, current events, or ranch matters. On her 5th day at the Rocking S, Victoria encountered her first genuine challenge. While organising linens in the upstairs hall closet, she discovered water damage along the back wall, indicating a leak in the roof above. Without hesitation, she sought out Caleb Tucker, who was repairing tack in the barn. "Mr. Tucker, there appears to be water seepage in the upstairs hall. Could someone examine the roof for damaged shingles?" The foreman glanced up from his work. "Mr. Sullivan usually handles house repairs himself. He's particular about changes to the main building." "He's inspecting the north boundary fence today," Victoria pointed out. "The damage suggests an ongoing issue that shouldn't wait." Tucker studied her thoughtfully, perhaps assessing whether this new woman was overstepping. Whatever he saw in her calm determination apparently satisfied him. "Miguel has experience with roofing," he conceded. "I'll send him up to look." By mid-afternoon, Miguel had identified and repaired several loose shingles above the damaged section. Victoria, meanwhile, had removed the affected linens for washing and arranged for the damp plaster to be dried and monitored. When Emmett returned at dusk, Tucker reported the situation and resolution. Victoria watched carefully, uncertain how the ranch owner would react to her taking initiative in his absence. Emmett listened to the account, then turned to her with quiet approval. "Thank you for addressing that promptly, Miss Harrington. Small issues neglected often become major repairs." "I hope I wasn't presumptuous," she replied. "But water damage spreads quickly if untreated." "Presumptuous?" He seemed genuinely puzzled. "You acted with good judgment to protect the property. That's precisely what partnership requires." The simple validation, acknowledging her decision as appropriate rather than questioning her authority, contrasted sharply with Howard Green's dismissal of her business suggestions and Judge Wilson's assumption that she would require constant direction. As her first week at the Rocking S concluded, Victoria found herself increasingly drawn to the possibility of remaining. The ranch offered purpose, respect, and the opportunity to apply her capabilities in meaningful ways. Emmett Sullivan had proven to be a man of integrity who valued her judgment and experience rather than focusing on her age or appearance. Yet questions remained. Could she adapt permanently to the isolation of ranch life after Philadelphia's society? Would Emmett's clear-eyed practicality develop into genuine affection over time? And most fundamentally, could she embrace this unexpected path, knowing it represented compromise rather than romantic fulfillment? On Sunday morning, Victoria was surprised when Emmett appeared at breakfast in a formal suit rather than his usual ranch attire. "I attend services in Clearwater Junction when weather permits," he explained. "You're welcome to accompany me, though there's no obligation." The invitation presented an opportunity Victoria hadn't anticipated, returning to town as Emmett Sullivan's companion rather than Howard Green's rejected bride or Judge Wilson's housekeeper would reframe her standing in the community. More importantly, seeing Emmett interact with townspeople might provide additional insights into his character. "I'd be pleased to join you," she decided. The 2-hour journey passed pleasantly, Emmett pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the region's early settlement. Victoria found herself increasingly comfortable in his company, their conversation flowing naturally from topic to topic without awkward silences or forced pleasantries. As they approached Clearwater Junction, however, Her apprehension grew. Barely 9 days had passed since she'd departed under curious stares and whispered speculation. Returning on the arm of the territory's most substantial rancher would inevitably create fresh gossip. Emmett seemed to sense her tension. "Small towns have active imaginations and short attention spans, Miss Harrington," he observed. "Today they'll speculate about us. Next week it will be someone else's turn." The reassurance, delivered without a condescension, helped Victoria straighten her shoulders and compose her expression as they entered town. The simple church near the edge of Clearwater Junction was already filling with families when their wagon arrived. Heads turned as Emmett assisted Victoria down, his hand steady at her elbow. She was conscious of curious glances and whispered comments, but found they affected her less than anticipated. The dignity of her escort and her own growing confidence created an armor against petty judgment. Inside the church, Emmett led her to a pew midway down the center aisle, neither hiding at the back nor prominently displaying themselves at the front. The gesture, like so many aspects of his behavior, demonstrated consideration without fanfare. As the congregation settled, Victoria became aware of familiar faces. Howard Green, studiously avoiding eye contact from across the aisle. Judge Wilson, assessing her changed circumstances with calculating eyes, and young Lily Everett offering a shy wave from where she sat with her brothers and father. The service itself was simple but sincere, the young minister delivering a thoughtful sermon on finding value in unexpected places. Victoria found herself reflecting on how aptly the message applied to her current situation, discovering potential purpose on a cattle ranch after a lifetime in Philadelphia, possibly finding partnership with a silver-haired rancher when society deemed her too old for new beginnings. When the service concluded, Emmett remained beside her as congregation members approached to satisfy their curiosity. He introduced her with simple dignity, Miss Victoria Harrington, who is considering a position at the Rocking S, neither claiming more than existed nor diminishing her standing by specifying housekeeper or companion. Howard Green eventually made his way to them, commercial instinct apparently overcoming personal discomfort. "Sullivan, good to see you. Will you be needing supplies today?" "Not this trip, Green." Emmett's tone was polite but cooler than his usual manner. "We're returning to the ranch directly after services." The mercantile owner's gaze flicked to Victoria, embarrassment and calculation warring in his expression. "Miss Harrington, I trust you're well settled." "Very well, thank you," she replied evenly. "The Rocking S is most impressive." Before further awkwardness could develop, Judge Wilson approached, his manner suggesting he viewed the conversation as an opportunity to be seized. "Sullivan, didn't expect to see you in town today." The judge's hearty greeting poorly masked his speculative assessment of Victoria's presence. "I see you've become acquainted with Miss Harrington. A remarkable lady. I offered her a position myself, you know." Victoria maintained her composure as Emmett responded with deceptive mildness. "Indeed? Then you recognized her capabilities?" "As I have, Miss Harrington's practical wisdom is exactly what the Rocking S requires." The subtle emphasis on wisdom rather than youth or beauty wasn't lost on the judge, whose smile tightened almost imperceptibly. As they made their way through similar encounters, Victoria observed Emmett's consistent approach, treating her with respect, acknowledging her value without excessive claims, and gently but firmly correcting any attempt to diminish her standing. Their final interaction proved the most affecting. Thomas Everett approached with his 4 children in tow, the younger boys barely contained by their Sunday best, Lily attempting maternal management beyond her years. "Mr. Sullivan," the blacksmith nodded respectfully before turning to Victoria. "Miss Harrington, the children wanted to say hello." The simple greeting held no ulterior motive, just genuine goodwill. Victoria smiled at the girl. "Hello, Lily. Your dress is lovely. The child beamed. Made it myself from Ma's old curtains. You still know how to make those corn cakes you fixed us? I do indeed, Victoria assured her, touched that the brief cooking lesson during her visit had made an impression. Emmett observed the exchange with interest. As they returned to the wagon, he commented, "You connected with the Everett children during your time in town?" Victoria explained her brief consideration of Thomas Everett's household. His situation is desperate, 4 children needing care and a business requiring his full attention, but he couldn't offer proper marriage, just accommodation in exchange for domestic service. Emmett's expression darkened slightly. Many men view women's contributions as commodities to be purchased at discount, rather than partnerships to be valued appropriately. He assisted her into the wagon with careful courtesy. "I hope you find my proposition fundamentally different in nature." As they journeyed back to the ranch, Victoria reflected on the morning's experiences. Returning to Clearwater Junction had clarified much. The limited options she had faced there, the subtle condescension even in supposedly generous offers, and the contrast between those interactions and Emmett Sullivan's consistent respect. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching twilight settle over the valley, Victoria made her decision. 10 days had provided sufficient evidence of Emmett's character and the ranch's operations to trust her judgment. "Mr. Sullivan," she began, turning slightly to face him, "I believe I've observed enough to respond to your proposition." He set aside the ranch ledger he'd been reviewing, giving her his full attention. "And your thoughts, Miss Harrington?" "I find your offer of partnership compelling," she stated directly. "The Rocking S is a remarkable achievement, and the opportunity to contribute to its management is appealing. However, I would need certain assurances beyond those you've already outlined." Rather than showing impatience, Emmett nodded encouragingly. "Please continue." "First, I would require legal protection, specifically a marriage contract specifying my rights to a portion of ranch proceeds and property should you predecease me." The request was bold, but Victoria had witnessed too many widows left vulnerable by their husband's failure to provide security. "Entirely reasonable," Emmett agreed without hesitation. "I've already instructed my lawyer to prepare such documents, anticipating you might have similar concerns. The ranch will eventually pass to my nephew's children, but your lifetime security would be guaranteed." His foresight, recognizing and addressing her likely concerns before she voiced them, strengthened Victoria's confidence in his respect for her intelligence. "Second," she continued, "I would expect true partnership in household and ranch management decisions, with my judgment respected in areas where I develop expertise." Emmett's expression remained attentive. "That is precisely what I seek, a partner whose capabilities complement my own. I have little patience for domestic details, but recognize their importance to successful operations. Your organizational skills would be invaluable." Victoria drew a deep breath before stating her final condition. "And I would hope that over time, our practical arrangement might develop into genuine companionship based on mutual respect and affection." For the first time, she detected slight surprise in his steady gaze. "Miss Harrington, at our age, many would consider sentiment irrelevant to practical arrangements." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but I've observed that the most enduring partnerships contain elements of both practicality and genuine regard. I wouldn't expect romantic declarations, but neither would I wish to enter a union entirely devoid of personal warmth." Emmett considered her words carefully before responding. "A valid observation. My proposal emphasized practical benefits because I assumed, perhaps incorrectly, that a woman of your intelligence would prioritize security over sentiment. But I should clarify that I already hold you in high esteem, Miss Harrington. I would, Certainly hope that mutual respect might deepen into genuine affection as we build a shared life. The honest response, neither promising unrealistic romance nor dismissing emotional connection as irrelevant, confirmed Victoria's assessment of his character. "Then I accept your proposal, Mr. Sullivan," she stated simply. "I believe we could build something worthwhile together at the Rocking S." The smile that transformed his weathered features held genuine warmth. "Victoria, may I call you Victoria now? You honor me with your acceptance. I believe we will indeed create a partnership of value to us both." As twilight deepened into night, they remained on the porch discussing practical arrangements. They would marry in Clearwater Junction the following Sunday, with Caleb Tucker and Mrs. Gunderson as witnesses. Victoria would write to her few remaining connections in Philadelphia, informing them of her new circumstances. Emmett would ensure legal documents protecting her interests were properly executed. Later, alone in the blue room that would soon be hers permanently, Victoria stood by the window gazing at the moonlit valley. At 45, she had never expected to begin a new chapter so different from the life she had known. Yet here she was, preparing to become mistress of a successful ranch, partner to a man who valued her maturity rather than dismissing it as liability. The journey from rejected mail-order bride to rancher's wife had been anything but direct. Yet as Victoria considered the path that had led her here, she recognized how each disappointment had ultimately guided her toward this unexpected opportunity, a place where the silver in her hair was seen not as a flaw, but as evidence of wisdom, earned through experience. Sometimes, she reflected, what appeared to be the end of possibilities was merely the necessary clearing of path toward the right beginning. The wedding was held on a crisp Sunday morning in mid-May, with the mountains standing as silent witnesses. The vows exchanged in Clearwater Junction's modest church. Victoria wore a dove-grey silk dress she had carefully altered from her best Philadelphia gown. Emmett appeared in a formal black suit that emphasized his straight posture and dignified bearing. Their small wedding party consisted of just Mrs. Gunderson, Caleb Tucker, and to Victoria's surprise, young Lily Everett, who had asked her father's permission to attend. The ceremony itself was brief and straightforward, the young minister clearly relieved to be conducting a conventional service rather than addressing the whispered speculation that had circulated through town. When Emmett placed a simple gold band on Victoria's finger and promised to honor and cherish, rather than the traditional love and cherish, she noted the careful honesty in his choice of words. This was a union founded on respect and practical partnership, with affection a hope rather than a certainty. What Victoria hadn't anticipated was the subtle shift in the community's reception as they emerged from the church as husband and wife. Where just weeks earlier she had been the too-old mail-order bride passed between potential suitors, she now received congratulations with a new deference as Mrs. Emmett Sullivan, mistress of the Rocking S Ranch. The transformation had nothing to do with her inherent worth, which remained unchanged, but everything to do with the frontier's pragmatic respect for established position and property. Howard Green approached with forced joviality to offer congratulations, his manner suggesting he now regretted his hasty rejection. Judge Wilson followed, pompously declaring he had always seen great potential in the match. Victoria accepted their good wishes with composed dignity, neither highlighting their previous dismissals nor pretending they hadn't occurred. Only Thomas Everett's congratulations felt genuinely sincere. "You'll do well at the Rocking S, Mrs. Sullivan," he said simply, his hand on Lily's shoulder. "Mr. Sullivan's fortunate to have found you." After a small reception at the hotel, arranged by Emmett without Victoria's knowledge, they departed for the ranch that would now be truly her home. The journey back seemed different somehow, the landscape more vibrant, the possibilities more tangible. "Mrs. Sullivan," Emmett said as they crested the final ridge overlooking the ranch buildings, "welcome home." The words carried weight beyond their simplicity. At 45, Victoria had believed herself destined for continued dependence on the charity of distant relatives or employment in increasingly menial positions as age further limited her options. Now she was mistress of a prosperous ranch, with purpose, security, and the chance to build something meaningful in her remaining years. The transition from guest to mistress of the rocking S proceeded more smoothly than Victoria had dared hope. Mrs. Gunderson, far from resenting the new authority in the household, seemed relieved to relinquish overall management while maintaining her cooking duties. "These old bones not meant for ordering entire household," she declared pragmatically. "You have good systems, Mrs. Sullivan. I follow gladly." Victoria approached her new role methodically, much as she had managed her parents' household through years of illness and financial challenges. She began by thoroughly inventorying supplies, reviewing maintenance needs, and establishing clear routines for household operations. The ranch hands, initially cautious around their boss's new wife, gradually relaxed as Victoria proved both practical in her requirements and appreciative of their difficult work. Emmett observed her growing command of household affairs with evident satisfaction, neither interfering nor withholding information when she requested it. Their evenings continued much as before their marriage. Shared meals, conversation about ranch operations or books from Emmett's surprisingly extensive library, and occasional games of chess in which Victoria discovered her new husband to be a formidable but not unbeatable opponent. Their personal relationship developed with similar measured progress. Emmett maintained his private bedroom across the hall from hers, honoring the separate sleeping arrangements agreed upon in their initial discussions. Yet other boundaries gradually softened. Where once he had been formally courteous, now he might sometimes rest his hand briefly on her shoulder when reviewing account books together, or offer his arm when they walked to the garden Sarah Sullivan had planted years earlier. Victoria found herself growing increasingly comfortable with these small gestures of companionship. Despite initial reservations about marrying a virtual stranger, she discovered in Emmett a man whose core values aligned remarkably with her own: integrity, diligence, practicality tempered with kindness, and respect for capabilities regardless of conventional expectations. Their first significant challenge as a married couple arose 6 weeks after the wedding. Victoria had been methodically organizing the ranch's financial records, consolidating information previously kept in multiple ledgers, when she discovered a concerning pattern of increasing costs in fence maintenance along the northern boundary. "These expenses have nearly doubled over the past year," she mentioned to Emmett that evening, showing him the figures she had compiled. "Is there a particular reason?" Emmett studied the neat columns of numbers, a slight frown creasing his weathered features. "We've had repeated damage to the north boundary. Cut wires, damaged posts. I've assumed it was either careless hunters or perhaps local troublemakers." "The pattern seems too consistent for random damage," Victoria observed, tapping the dates. She had noted, "These incidents occur approximately every 3 weeks, always near the section bordering the Blackwood property." Emmett's expression darkened at the name. "Marcus Blackwood has wanted that northern pasture land since he arrived from Texas 3 years ago. He made an offer when I was still grieving Sarah's death, substantially below market value, and took it poorly when I declined." "Could he be deliberately causing damage to pressure you into selling?" Victoria asked, already calculating the financial impact of continued sabotage. "It would match his reputation," Emmett acknowledged, "but suspicion isn't proof, and accusing a neighbor of such tactics without evidence would only escalate tensions." Victoria considered this, appreciating her husband's measured approach while recognizing the need for resolution. "Perhaps we need better information before deciding how to proceed." The next morning, Victoria surprised Emmett by appearing At breakfast, dressed in a split riding skirt, she had modified from one of her plainer dresses. "I'd like to accompany Caleb when he checks the northern boundary today," she announced. Emmett's eyebrows rose slightly. "The north section requires several hours of riding over rough terrain. Are you certain you're up to it?" "I rode regularly. As a girl in Pennsylvania," Victoria replied. "While I'm obviously out of practice, I believe I can manage if given a suitable mount. And I'd like to see this boundary issue firsthand rather than relying on reports." Rather than dismissing her request or questioning her capability, as Howard Green or Judge Wilson undoubtedly would have done, Emmett simply nodded. "I'll have Miguel saddle Belle for you. She's steady and patient with inexperienced riders. I'd prefer a mount that matches my circumstances rather than my presumed limitations," Victoria countered gently. "Perhaps something between a child's pony and a spirited stallion." A smile creased Emmett's weathered features. "Well stated. Daisy might suit. She's sure-footed and reliable, but with enough spirit to handle the terrain." He studied Victoria with newfound appreciation. "You continue to surprise me, Mrs. Sullivan. A marriage should contain some elements of discovery, Mr. Sullivan," she replied with a hint of humor, even one based primarily on practical considerations. The boundary inspection proved even more illuminating than Victoria had anticipated. Riding beside Caleb Tucker, she observed not only the deliberately cut fence wires the foreman pointed out, but also subtle signs of cattle being driven through the damaged sections, clear indication that the sabotage was facilitating livestock theft rather than merely creating inconvenience. "How many head do you estimate we've lost?" she asked Tucker as they surveyed the latest damage. The foreman removed his hat, wiping his brow before responding. "Hard to be certain without a full count, ma'am, but I'd guess 30, maybe 40 over the past year. Not enough to notice immediately in a herd of 2,000, but it adds up." Victoria did the mental calculation. At current market prices, that represents a loss of nearly $2,000, not including the repair costs. Tucker nodded grimly. "Blackwood knows exactly what he's doing, taking just enough to hurt the rocking S without triggering a full investigation. Most ranchers expect some losses to predators and strays, but these aren't strays or predator kills," Victoria observed. "This is systematic theft." "Yes, ma'am," Tucker agreed, "but proving it would be another matter. Cattle stolen this way would be rebranded and mixed with Blackwood's herds before anyone could trace them." Victoria studied the broken fence thoughtfully. "Perhaps we shouldn't try to prove the past thefts, but rather prevent future ones." That evening, she presented Emmett with her observations and a proposed strategy. Rather than confronting Blackwood directly or seeking legal intervention based on circumstantial evidence, she suggested a more subtle approach. "We maintain the appearance of continuing repairs as usual," she explained, spreading a rough map of the property across the desk. "But we also establish a rotation of concealed watchers at likely target areas. When Blackwood or his men come to damage the fence again, we'll have witnesses." Emmett considered the plan. It would require committing men to watch duty when they're needed elsewhere on the ranch. "I've calculated the costs," Victoria countered, presenting the figures she'd worked out. "Even if we need to hire 2 additional hands temporarily, we'd still save substantially compared to continuing losses. And once we have concrete evidence, we can approach the territorial magistrate with confidence." The carefully reasoned proposal, complete with financial projections and practical considerations, exemplified why Emmett had sought a woman of mature judgment as his partner. Where a younger bride might have demanded immediate confrontation or become fearful of potential conflict, Victoria approached the problem with the same methodical analysis she brought to household management. "A sound strategy," Emmett acknowledged. "Though I admit, I'm curious why Blackwood's activities concern you so personally. Most new wives would leave such matters entirely to their husbands." Victoria met his gaze directly. "Because I didn't marry merely to secure a home, Mr. Sullivan. I married to be a genuine partner in building something worthwhile. The Rocking S isn't just your legacy, it's now mine as well, and I protect what's mine." Something shifted in Emmett's expression, respect deepening into something warmer. "Well said, Mrs. Sullivan. Let's implement your plan immediately." The strategy yielded results faster than either had anticipated. Just 10 days later, Miguel and one of the newer hands witnessed two of Blackwood's men deliberately cutting fence wires in the pre-dawn hours. Instead of confronting them directly, the watchers documented the damage and tracked the men back to Blackwood's ranch, establishing a clear connection. Armed with this evidence, Emmett and Victoria made the journey to the territorial capital, where they presented their case to the magistrate. Victoria's meticulously organized documentation of the pattern of damage, financial losses, and eyewitness accounts proved compelling. Within days, the magistrate dispatched a U.S. Marshal to investigate, resulting in the recovery of 28 head of cattle bearing altered Rocking S brands. The legal consequences for Blackwood were significant, substantial. Fines, compensation for the stolen cattle, and a severely damaged reputation among neighboring ranchers. But the true victory for Victoria lay in the community's reaction to her role in resolving the situation. When she and Emmett next attended church in Clearwater Junction, conversations paused as they entered, resuming with a new tone of respect. No longer was Victoria viewed as merely the old mail-order bride who had somehow secured a wealthy husband. Now she was recognized as Mrs. Sullivan, the shrewd partner who had protected the Rocking S from a predatory neighbor through intelligence, rather than confrontation. Even Judge Wilson, who had offered Victoria only a position as housekeeper 2 months earlier, approached with newfound deference. "Mrs. Sullivan, your handling of the Blackwood situation shows remarkable discernment. The women's improvement. Society would benefit greatly from your participation in our charitable initiatives." Victoria accepted the invitation with gracious dignity, recognizing it as both validation of her new standing and an opportunity to further establish the Rocking S as a force for community development. As summer progressed into autumn, Victoria's integration into ranch operations continued to deepen. Her organizational systems improved efficiency throughout the property, from kitchen to bunkhouse to Emmett's previously chaotic office. She established a medical supply cabinet that proved invaluable when one of the younger hands suffered a serious cutting injury during fence repairs, and her ability to administer proper first aid prevented potential infection until the doctor could arrive from Clearwater. Perhaps most significantly, Victoria gradually expanded her involvement beyond traditional women's sphere activities. She began accompanying Emmett when he negotiated cattle sales, offering quiet observations that often strengthened their bargaining position. She developed innovative solutions for recurring challenges, such as creating a rotating schedule for hands to receive time off in town without leaving the ranch short-handed. During this period, the relationship between Victoria and Emmett evolved as well. Their practical partnership remained the foundation, but genuine affection increasingly colored their interactions. Emmett began sharing more personal stories from his younger years, his early struggles to establish the ranch, his gradual courtship of Sarah over her father's initial objections, the mining accident that had taken his leg but ultimately led him to silver deposits that financed his cattle operation. In turn, Victoria revealed aspects of her life in Philadelphia beyond the bare facts of caring for aging parents. Her brief engagement at 22 to a promising young lawyer who died of typhoid before their wedding, her self-education through her father's extensive library when women's formal schooling was limited, her quiet pride in managing household affairs through increasingly difficult financial circumstances. These exchanges, usually occurring during evening hours before the fire, created a deepening bond of mutual understanding. They remained in separate bedrooms, but the emotional distance between them gradually diminished. In late September, an unexpected crisis accelerated this evolving connection. Victoria had ridden to the eastern pasture to deliver lunch to the hands working the fall roundup when a sudden mountain thunderstorm erupted with alarming ferocity. Attempting to return to the main house, she became disoriented in the driving, rain and fading light. Belle, her mount, slipped on a rain-slicked hillside, sending Victoria tumbling to the ground. The fall wasn't serious, but it left her thoroughly soaked and increasingly chilled as temperatures dropped with evening's approach. Realizing she risked hypothermia if she continued wandering in the storm, Victoria located a small line shack, used during distant pasture work, and managed to reach its shelter. The cabin contained basic emergency supplies, matches, lantern, tinned food, blankets, but nothing that could sufficiently warm someone already wet through. Victoria's practical nature asserted itself despite growing discomfort. She knew her absence would eventually trigger a search, but with darkness falling and the storm raging, finding her would be challenging. She needed to survive the night. Using skills developed through years of managing household crises, Victoria methodically addressed her situation. She removed her sodden clothing, wrapping herself in the rough blankets while arranging her dress and petticoats near the small fire she managed to start in the shack's tiny stove. She found a tin of coffee and heated water, knowing the hot liquid would help raise her core temperature. At the main house, Emmett's concern transformed to alarm. When Victoria hadn't returned 2 hours after the storm began, when Belle appeared riderless at the barn, he immediately organized search parties despite the continuing downpour and gathering darkness. "She's smart," he told the anxious ranch hands as they prepared to depart. "She would seek shelter, not wander aimlessly. Check all the line shacks and natural overhangs in the eastern section." The fear in his voice, so unlike his usual measured tone, revealed what perhaps he himself hadn't fully recognized until that moment. Victoria had become essential to him, not merely as a practical partner, but as a companion he genuinely cherished. It was Emmett himself who found her, following instinct more than logic to the smallest and most distant line shack. The relief that flooded through him upon seeing smoke from its chimney was overwhelming. When he pushed open the door and saw Victoria, wrapped in blankets but alert and composed despite her ordeal, something fundamental shifted in their relationship. "Emmett," she said simply, using his given name for one of the first times since their marriage. "I knew someone would come." "I would have searched all night," he replied, his voice rough with emotion as he crossed the small space to kneel beside her. "Are you injured?" "Just chilled and somewhat bruised," she assured him. "Belle slipped on the hillside. I hope she found her way home." "She did," he confirmed, removing his coat to place around her blanket-covered shoulders. "That's how we knew you were in trouble." As Emmett built up the fire and prepared to transport Victoria back to the main house once the worst of the storm passed, their conversation maintained its usual practical focus, the progress of the roundup, whether Belle had suffered injury, how the storm might affect the creek crossing. Yet underlying this ordinary exchange was a new awareness, as if the crisis had stripped away remaining pretense between them. When they finally reached home near midnight, Emmett surprised Victoria by carrying her from the wagon to the house, despite his wooden leg and her protests that she could walk perfectly well. "Indulge me, Victoria," he said quietly. "I need to know you're truly safe." Later, after dry clothes, hot food, and Mrs. Gunderson's fussing, Victoria sat wrapped in quilts before the parlor fire. Emmett entered with a steaming cup of tea, placing it in her hands before taking the chair opposite. "You gave me quite a fright," he said, after a moment's silence. "I'm sorry to have caused concern," she replied. I should have started back, earlier when I saw the clouds building. That's not... Emmett stopped, seeming to search for words, which was unusual for a man typically so articulate. I've been thinking about what it would mean to lose you. The simple statement carried profound implications. Victoria waited, allowing him space to continue or retreat as he chose. When Sarah died, I lost my first true partner, he continued finally. I mourned her deeply, but the ranch required attention. Decisions needed making. Life continued as it must. He met Victoria's gaze directly. I sought you as a practical solution to practical problems. I didn't expect to care. Victoria supplied gently when he faltered. Yes. The admission seemed to release something long constrained. You've become essential, Victoria, not just for your capabilities, though those are considerable, but for yourself, your steadiness, your quiet strength, your fundamental decency. I find I've grown to care for you far more deeply than our arrangement required. The confession, delivered without dramatic declaration, but with profound sincerity, touched Victoria more deeply than any youthful protestations of undying love might have done. At 45, she had no illusions about romance as depicted in novels. What Emmett offered was something far more valuable, genuine appreciation born of shared experience and demonstrated character. I've come to care for you as well, she acknowledged, her natural reserve softening, more than I anticipated when accepting your proposition. Something eased in Emmett's expression, tension released, uncertainty resolved. Then perhaps, he suggested carefully, we might reconsider certain aspects of our arrangement, if you're amenable. Victoria understood his meaning without requiring explicit explanation. Their marriage, begun as a practical partnership with separate lives under one roof, had evolved into something more meaningful. The separate bedrooms that had initially provided comfortable distance now represented an artificial barrier between two people who had developed genuine regard for one another. I believe that would be appropriate, she agreed with quiet dignity. After all, a true partnership should evolve as circumstances change. The subtle shift in their marriage that followed Victoria's ordeal was apparent not just in their new sleeping arrangements, but in countless small interactions. Emmett's hand would linger on hers when passing documents for review. Victoria might straighten his collar before he departed for business in town, or bring coffee to his office without being asked when she knew he was working on challenging calculations. These gestures weren't the passionate demonstrations of youthful romance, but rather the thoughtful attentions of mature individuals who had discovered, somewhat to their mutual surprise, that their practical arrangement had blossomed into genuine affection. By early December, as the first snows transformed the rocking S into a winter wonderland, Victoria had been mistress of the ranch for nearly 7 months. The transformation in her circumstances remained sometimes startling when she reflected upon it, from rejected mail-order bride facing destitution to respected ranch wife with genuine purpose and partnership. The most profound validation of this transformation came unexpectedly during preparations for Christmas. Victoria had always enjoyed the holiday despite limited means in Philadelphia, creating festive traditions through ingenuity rather than expenditure. At the Rocking S, with greater resources available, she planned a celebration that would honor both past traditions and new beginnings. When Emmett returned from a business trip to Denver 2 weeks before Christmas, he brought not only the supplies Victoria had requested, but also an unexpected gift, a beautiful silver-backed hairbrush with matching hand mirror. I noticed your old brush was wearing thin, he explained, as she examined the elegant set with its delicate engravings of mountain wildflowers. The craftsman in Denver said these would complement silver hair particularly well. The specific reference to her grey-streaked hair, the very feature that had caused Howard Green to find her unsuitable, delivered with genuine appreciation rather than reluctant tolerance, epitomized how completely her life had transformed. "They're beautiful," Victoria said, deeply touched by both the gift and its implicit message. "Thank you for noticing such a detail." "I notice a great deal about you, Victoria," Emmett replied simply, "including how thoroughly you've transformed. The rocking S in just half a year. The ranch has always been profitable, but you've made it truly thrive." The acknowledgement of her contribution, delivered not as obligatory praise but as recognized fact, represented the respect Victoria had sought throughout her adult life. Not blind adoration or flattery, but genuine recognition of her capabilities and value. As they stood together in the parlor decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the coming celebration, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The rejection that had initially seemed so devastating, Howard Green's barely concealed disappointment in her age, had actually been the necessary catalyst directing her toward a partnership of genuine equality and appreciation. At 45, with silver-streaked hair and life-earned wisdom, Victoria Harrington Sullivan had found not just security or purpose, but something she had never dared expect at this stage of life: a new beginning alongside someone who valued the very qualities others had dismissed as liabilities. The silver in her hair, she now understood, wasn't a flaw to be disguised or tolerated. It was evidence of a life fully lived, of challenges overcome, of wisdom earned through experience. And in the right eyes, those that recognized substance beneath surface, such evidence represented not diminished value, but enhanced worth. Sometimes, Victoria reflected as Emmett's arms settled comfortably around her shoulders, what appeared to be the end of possibilities was merely the necessary clearing of path toward the right beginning. Her silver-streaked wisdom had finally found its proper appreciation in the silver-haired rancher, who saw clearly what others had been too short-sighted to recognize. Spring arrived at the Rocking S Ranch, with a gentle persistence that mirrored Victoria's own integration into ranch life. Meadows that had lain dormant under winter snow now erupted with wildflowers, painting the landscape in vibrant purples, yellows and blues. Newborn calves wobbled alongside their mothers in the greening pastures, their presence confirming the success of Emmett's careful breeding program. As the first anniversary of her arrival in Colorado Territory approached, Victoria found herself reflecting on the extraordinary transformation of her circumstances. 1 year ago, she had been a desperate spinster selling her last possessions to finance an uncertain journey west. Now she was mistress of one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory, respected in the community, and most surprising of all, genuinely content in a marriage that had begun as mere practical arrangement. "A penny for your thoughts," Emmett said, joining her on the porch, where she had paused to watch the sunset paint the mountains in fiery hues. "I was just considering how completely life can change in a single year," Victoria replied, accepting the coffee cup he offered. "Last April, I was preparing to leave everything familiar behind without any certainty of what awaited." Emmett settled beside her, his wooden leg extended comfortably. At 63, his silver hair caught the fading sunlight, emphasizing the dignity that Victoria had come to find so appealing. "Any regrets?" he asked quietly. Victoria considered the question seriously, as was her nature. "None about coming west or accepting your proposition," she answered truthfully, "though I occasionally wonder what became of the things I sold. My mother's china, my father's books, items without significant monetary value, but carrying memories I sometimes miss." Emmett nodded, understanding in his expression. The past always travels with us, even when its physical tokens remain behind. The simple observation, delivered without platitudes or dismissal, exemplified why their partnership had deepened beyond its pragmatic origins. Emmett consistently treated Victoria's thoughts and feelings as matters deserving genuine consideration, rather than female sentimentality to be humored or ignored. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a ranch hand on horseback, raising dust along the road from town. Miguel dismounted with unusual haste, removing his hat as he approached the porch. "Mr. Sullivan, Mrs. Sullivan, I've brought mail and news from Clearwater," he announced, extending a small packet of letters. "The railroad survey team has arrived. They're measuring routes through the valley." Emmett straightened, his expression alert. Rumors of a railroad spur connecting the mining regions to Denver had circulated for months, but concrete developments were new information. "Where exactly are they surveying?" he asked, accepting the mail from Miguel. "Along the eastern approach, and through Harper's Gap," the young hand replied. "Mr. Green at the Mercantile says they're considering 3 possible routes." After Miguel departed to care for his horse, Emmett turned to Victoria, excitement visible beneath his usual reserve. The railroad would change everything for the Rocking S. "Currently, we drive cattle 60 miles to the nearest railhead. A spur through our valley would reduce transportation costs dramatically and increase property values throughout the region." Victoria immediately grasped the implications. It would also bring more settlers, additional businesses, probably even a proper town closer than Clearwater Junction. "Indeed," Emmett agreed. "Progress brings both opportunity and challenge." As they sorted through the mail together, a ritual they had established early in their marriage, Victoria noticed an unusually elegant envelope addressed to her husband. The fine paper and formal calligraphy suggested communication of significance rather than ordinary business correspondence. Emmett opened it with raised eyebrows, scanning the contents before passing it to Victoria. "An invitation from the governor," he explained. "He's hosting a reception in Denver for territorial business leaders and significant landowners to discuss development initiatives, including the railroad expansion. We're both specifically invited." Victoria studied the invitation with interest. "The governor's wife will be hosting a separate ladies' tea during the business discussions," she noted, a trace of disappointment in her voice. Emmett heard the unspoken sentiment. "You've contributed as much to the Rocking S's current success as I have," he observed. "Your insights regarding the railroad's potential impact would be valuable in the main discussions." The casual acknowledgement of her business acumen, delivered as simple fact rather than unusual concession, reminded Victoria yet again how substantially her circumstances had changed. Howard Green had dismissed her suggestions about inventory management. Thomas Everett had valued her only as potential childcare. Judge Wilson had seen her as merely a housekeeper. Yet Emmett consistently recognized her as a legitimate partner in ranch operations, not just domestic matters. "Would it be appropriate for me to attend the business session rather than the ladies' tea?" she asked, considering the social conventions they would encounter in Denver. Emmett's mouth quirked in the half-smile she had come to recognize as genuine amusement. "Appropriate? Perhaps not by fashionable standards. Beneficial to our interests? Almost certainly. The Rocking S has prospered partly because we disregard conventions that don't serve practical purposes." The simple "we" encompassed a world of meaning. Acknowledgement of their genuine partnership, recognition of shared values, affirmation of Victoria's role in the ranch's success. In 10 months of marriage, Emmett had consistently demonstrated through word and action that he viewed Victoria as a true collaborator, rather than a subordinate helpmate or decorative accessory. "Then we shall attend together," Victoria decided, "though I'll need to review our records regarding potential railroad impacts before the meeting, and perhaps a new dress would be prudent for such an important occasion." Plans for the Denver trip soon expanded beyond the governor's reception. The territorial capital offered amenities unavailable in Clearwater Junction: specialized medical care for Emmett's occasionally troublesome leg, access to quality textiles and household goods Victoria had been unable to source locally, and rare books to supplement the ranch's already impressive library. As Victoria organized preparations with her usual methodical efficiency, a letter arrived that introduced an unexpected element to their journey. Postmarked from Philadelphia, the unfamiliar handwriting gave no immediate clue to its sender. Victoria opened it with curiosity that quickly transformed to shock as she read the contents. "Is something wrong?" Emmett inquired, noting her expression as she lowered the letter. "Not wrong, precisely," Victoria replied carefully. "Unexpected. It's from a Mr. Warrington, an attorney representing my second cousin, George Harrington. Apparently George passed away 3 months ago." "My condolences," Emmett offered. "Were you close?" "Hardly," Victoria admitted. "I met him perhaps 3 times in my life, most recently at my mother's funeral 12 years ago. He was significantly older, nearly 80 now had he lived." "And his attorney is contacting you because," Emmett prompted gently, "because George apparently had no direct heirs and left certain items specifically to me in his will." Victoria's voice held bewilderment. "Some books from my father's collection that George purchased during the estate sale, along with mother's china and silver service. Mr. Warrington writes that these items are being held in storage in Denver. As executor records indicated, I had relocated to Colorado Territory." The coincidence seemed almost providential. The very items Victoria had mentioned missing just days earlier, now unexpectedly restored and available in the very city they planned to visit. Emmett recognized the significance immediately. "A remarkable turn of events," he observed. "Some tangible connections to your past returning just as you fully established your new life." The observation captured perfectly the symmetry of the situation. Victoria had been contemplating how completely her circumstances had transformed in a year's time, and now physical emblems of her previous life would be reincorporated into her new existence, not as desperate necessities sold for survival, but as cherished mementos integrated into a life of security and purpose. The journey to Denver 3 weeks later marked Victoria's first significant travel since arriving in Colorado Territory. The stagecoach ride, while still dusty and jarring, felt entirely different from her initial journey west. Where once she had been a solitary woman facing uncertain prospects, now she traveled as Mrs. Sullivan of the Rocking S Ranch, with her husband's solid presence beside her and legitimate business awaiting their attention. Denver's growth since Victoria had passed through a year earlier was immediately apparent. New buildings stretched along widened streets, elegant hotels and substantial businesses replacing hastily constructed wooden structures. The railroad's existing connection to eastern markets had transformed the rough mining camp into an emerging metropolitan center, offering a preview of how rail access might similarly affect their own region. The Sullivans' status as significant property owners secured them accommodations at Denver's finest hotel, where the desk clerk addressed Victoria with the same deference accorded her husband, a marked contrast to her treatment when initially arriving in Clearwater Junction as an unescorted female traveler of uncertain age. "Will you be attending the social events associated with the governor's reception, Mrs. Sullivan?" the clerk inquired as he provided their room keys. "Mrs. Sullivan will be accompanying me to the business discussions," Emmett replied before Victoria could respond. Her insights regarding agricultural development and land management are integral to our ranch operations. The clerk's carefully neutral expression couldn't completely mask his surprise, but his tone remained respectful. "Very good, sir. The main reception begins at 7 tomorrow evening, with business discussions scheduled for 9 the following morning." In their comfortably appointed suite, Victoria unpacked the new dress she had ordered, specially for the occasion. A deep burgundy silk with subtle trim that acknowledged current fashion while remaining appropriate for a woman of her years and position. The matching bonnet featured a single elegant feather rather than the elaborate decorations favored by younger women. "You'll outshine every lady at the reception," Emmett observed as she laid out the garments. Victoria smiled at the compliment, recognizing it as genuine appreciation rather than empty flattery. Denver society may not know what to make of a silver-haired ranch wife attending business discussions rather than ladies' tea. "Their confusion is immaterial," Emmett replied with characteristic directness. "We're here to protect and advance the Rockinges's interests, not conform to Denver's social expectations." The governor's reception that evening proved both grand and strategically important. Territorial officials mingled with business leaders, railroad representatives, and prominent landowners in the elegant surroundings of the governor's mansion. Conversations beneath crystal chandeliers established alliances and rivalries that would shape Colorado's development for years to come. Victoria navigated these interactions with the same poised dignity that had served her through Philadelphia. Society events in more prosperous days. Though clearly older than most wives in attendance, her intelligent contributions to discussions and evident partnership with Emmett gradually shifted initial skepticism to reluctant respect among the assembled power brokers. Governor Harrison himself sought them out midway through the evening, a calculating political assessment visible behind his congenial manner. "Sullivan, delighted you could join us. Your reputation as one of our most successful ranchers precedes you." "Governor," Emmett acknowledged with a respectful nod, "may I present my wife, Victoria Sullivan?" The governor turned to Victoria with practiced charm. "Mrs. Sullivan, a pleasure. I understand you've brought considerable Eastern refinement to one of our more remote ranching operations. My husband established the Rockinges's excellence long before my arrival, Governor," Victoria replied graciously. "I merely contribute organizational systems that complement his visionary development." The careful phrasing acknowledged Emmett's accomplishments while subtly establishing her own substantial role. "Mrs. Sullivan's modesty belies her considerable contributions," Emmett added. "Her analysis of our operational efficiency has increased profitability by nearly 20% in less than a year." The specific figure, accurate but impressive, caught the governor's attention more effectively than vague praise might have. Done. His assessment of Victoria visibly shifted from polite acknowledgement of a prominent man's wife to recognition of a potentially valuable connection. "Then, I look forward to hearing both your perspectives during tomorrow's discussions," he said with increased sincerity, "particularly regarding the proposed railroad routes through your region." As the governor moved on to other guests, Victoria and Emmett exchanged a glance of quiet satisfaction. Their partnership, so natural at the ranch, had just demonstrated its effectiveness in the more challenging arena of territorial politics. The remainder of the evening brought similar interactions, initial skepticism about Victoria's presence gradually yielding to recognition of her intelligence and capability. By the reception's conclusion, several influential businessmen had specifically sought her insights regarding agricultural development beyond the mining economy that had initially driven Colorado's growth. "You've made quite an impression," Emmett observed as they returned to their hotel. "Harrison's chief economic advisor requested to sit near you during tomorrow's session." Victoria acknowledged the observation with modest satisfaction. People are often willing to reconsider assumptions when presented with competence they didn't expect. The following morning's business discussions proved more substantive and consequential than the previous evening's social niceties. Gathered in the territorial capital's main chamber, 30 influential men and one silver-haired woman debated infrastructure development, water rights, and most critically, the proposed railroad expansion. Victoria's position as the only female participant initially created awkward moments, with several speakers directing their comments exclusively to the men present. But as discussion progressed to specific questions of land management and agricultural investment, Emmett consistently redirected relevant questions to Victoria, demonstrating their genuine partnership rather than merely allowing her presence. As a courtesy, "Mrs. Sullivan oversees our operational records," he would say, or "Victoria has analyzed the potential yield implications more thoroughly than I have." Each such reference established her legitimate expertise rather than merely reflected status through marriage. The critical moment arrived when discussion turned to specific railroad routes under consideration. The chief engineer unrolled detailed maps showing 3 potential paths through the region surrounding the rocking S. "Our primary considerations are grade management's construction costs and proximity to established mining operations," he explained, tracing potential routes with a wooden pointer. "The eastern approach through Harper's Gap offers the gentlest grade, but requires negotiations with multiple property owners. The central route follows existing wagon trails, but would require significant blasting through granite formations. The western route is longest, but crosses primarily public land." Victoria studied the maps with careful attention, immediately recognizing implications others might miss. The eastern route, crossing a corner of rocking S grazing land, would enhance their property value and provide direct access to markets. But she also noted something concerning about the proposed path. "Mr. Whitfield," she addressed the engineer directly, "has your survey team assessed seasonal water flow through Harper's Gap? Our records indicate significant flooding during spring melt, which might undermine track foundations." The question, specific, technical, and demonstrating both local knowledge and engineering awareness, silenced the room momentarily. The railroad engineer blinked in surprise before recovering his professional demeanor. "An excellent observation, Mrs. Sullivan," he acknowledged with genuine respect. "Our preliminary survey noted some drainage concerns, but we haven't completed seasonal assessments. Do you have specific data we might review?" "Indeed," Victoria replied. "Mr. Sullivan has maintained rainfall and flooding records for 20 years. I've compiled these into seasonal patterns that might prove valuable to your planning." The exchange transformed Victoria's position within the gathering. No longer was she merely a rancher's wife, unusually present at a business meeting. She was a knowledgeable stakeholder, offering valuable information unavailable from other sources. By the session's conclusion, the Sullivans had secured not only consideration for the most favorable route through their property, but also a commitment for a separate technical consultation between Victoria and the engineering team. What had begun as an unconventional decision to include a wife in business discussions had evolved into a strategic advantage for the rocking S. As they left the Capitol building, Emmett took Victoria's hand with uncharacteristic public demonstrativeness. "You were magnificent," he said simply. "Your question about seasonal flooding likely saved them millions in potential damage and reconstruction." Victoria accepted the praise with quiet satisfaction. "I merely applied local knowledge to technical proposals. Anyone with proper records would have noted the same concern." "But no one else did," Emmett pointed out, "because no one else combines your systematic approach to information with genuine understanding of our land." The remainder of their Denver visit balanced business with more personal matters. They visited the specialist who examined Emmett's leg and recommended modifications to his prosthesis that would reduce discomfort during long days on horseback. They selected books, household necessities, and quality fabric unavailable in Clearwater Junction. Most significantly, they visited the storage facility where Victoria's inherited items awaited. The attorney had arranged for their inspection before transportation to the ranch could be arranged. As the facility manager unlocked the designated room, Victoria felt an unexpected tightness in her chest. These objects represented not just family heirlooms, but tangible connections to a life she had believed permanently sacrificed for survival. The carefully crated items proved even more extensive than described in the attorney's letter. Beyond her mother's china and the silver tea service lay nearly 200 volumes from her father's library, philosophical works, literary classics, and scientific texts that had formed the foundation of Victoria's self-education. There were also photograph albums, a small landscape painting that had hung in her childhood bedroom, and even her mother's favorite shawl, carefully preserved in tissue paper. Victoria stood silent before these resurrected pieces of her past, momentarily overwhelmed by their unexpected return. Emmett remained quietly supportive beside her, understanding without explanation the emotional significance of the moment. "We'll need a larger wagon than anticipated," he finally said, his practical observation gently returning her to the present. "And perhaps additional shipping crates for safer transport over rough roads." Victoria nodded, gathering herself. Yes, that would be prudent. She touched the spine of a familiar volume, her father's prized first edition of Emerson's essays. "I never expected to see these again." "Yet here they are," Emmett observed, "not lost after all, just waiting to find their proper place in your new life." The metaphor wasn't lost on Victoria. Like these treasured objects, aspects of herself she had believed sacrificed, intellectual pursuits, appreciation for beauty, connection to heritage, were not actually lost, but merely awaiting proper circumstance for reintegration. As they arranged transportation for the inherited items, Victoria found herself increasingly eager to return to the rocking S. Denver's amenities and social connections had their value, but the ranch had become genuinely home during the past year, a place where she was valued for her full self rather than judged by limited expectations or conventional standards. Their return journey took longer than the trip to Denver. The wagon now laden with medical supplies, household goods, books, and Victoria's family heirlooms. As they crested the final ridge overlooking the ranch, the valley spread before them in spring glory, pastures lush with new grass, calves frolicking near their mothers, the main house standing solid against the mountain backdrop. "It looks even more beautiful than when we left," Victoria observed. "Because it's home now," Emmett replied simply, "not just a place of refuge or security, but truly where you belong." The welcome they received from ranch hands and Mrs. Gunderson confirmed this belonging. Miguel and the other workers greeted them with genuine pleasure rather than mere deference to employers. Mrs. Gunderson had prepared special dishes to celebrate their return and listened with uncharacteristic patience to Victoria's descriptions of Denver fashion and society. In the days that followed, Victoria integrated her inherited possessions into their shared home with thoughtful deliberation. Her mother's china found a place in the dining room cabinet alongside the practical everyday dishes. The silver tea service, polished to gleaming brilliance, became a centerpiece for the occasional formal entertaining their position required. Most significantly, her father's books were carefully arranged in the library, complementing Emmett's collection of Western histories and agricultural references with philosophical works, classic literature, and scientific texts previously absent from their shelves. "Your father had excellent taste in books," Emmett observed as Victoria arranged the final volumes. "These will enrich our winter evenings considerably." The casual reference to shared future pleasures, quiet nights reading together before the fire as snow piled against the windows, represented how completely their practical arrangement had evolved into genuine partnership and affection. What had begun as a marriage of convenience between a desperate mail-order bride and a silver-haired rancher had transformed into a relationship of mutual respect, appreciation, and deepening attachment. 2 weeks after their return from Denver, as they sat reviewing ranch accounts together in the evening, a ritual that had once been purely practical but now carried its own intimate pleasure, Emmett turned to Victoria with uncharacteristic hesitation. "I've been considering something since our return," he began. "Our visit to Denver and your recovery of family treasures has made me reflect on connections between past and future." Victoria set aside the ledger, giving him her full attention. "In what sense?" "My late wife Sarah established the rose garden as her particular domain," Emmett continued. "I've maintained it in her memory, but perhaps not with the attention it truly deserves. I wondered if you might consider taking it under your care, not replacing her connection to it, but adding your own." The request carried significance beyond simple gardening. The rose garden had been Sarah Sullivan's special project, her most visible, continuing presence on the ranch. Emmett's invitation for Victoria to assume its care represented not displacement of past attachments, but acknowledgement of new ones alongside them. Recognition that hearts, like gardens, can flourish under different caretakers while honoring original foundations. "I would be honored," Victoria replied, understanding the deeper meaning beneath the practical request. "Though I'll need guidance at first. My Philadelphia gardening experience doesn't necessarily translate to mountain conditions." "Mrs. Gunderson remembers which varieties Sarah found most successful," Emmett assured her, "and I believe your systematic approach will benefit the garden as it has other aspects of ranch operations." In the weeks that followed, Victoria divided her mornings between household management and careful work in the rose garden. She approached the task with the same methodical attention she brought to ranch accounts, cataloging existing varieties, researching optimal care techniques, implementing systematic improvements while respecting the garden's original design. As she worked among the thorny bushes, Victoria often reflected on the symbolism of her task. Like the rose plants themselves, dormant upon her arrival, but now flourishing under her attentive care, her own life had entered an unexpected second blooming. The silver in her hair that Howard Green had found so objectionable now caught the sunlight as she worked, no longer a badge of diminished value, but evidence of earned wisdom that her husband genuinely treasured. By mid-June, the rose garden had become Victoria's recognized domain among the ranch hands, who would respectfully detour around it rather than taking shortcuts across the yard. Mrs. Gunderson sometimes joined her there, sharing memories of Sarah's original plantings while acknowledging Victoria's thoughtful additions and improvements. "Mrs. Sarah would approve," the Norwegian woman observed one morning as they deadheaded spent blossoms together. "She always say gardens should evolve, not just remain." The simple validation, acknowledgement that Victoria's contribution complemented rather than erased what came before, touched her deeply. In tending Sarah's roses while adding her own selections, Victoria had found physical expression of her position at the rocking S. Not a replacement for what was lost, but a worthy successor, building thoughtfully upon established foundations. As June yielded to July, bringing summer heat and intensive ranch operations, news arrived that would further cement Victoria's transformation from rejected mail-order bride to respected community figure. The Railroad Commission had finalized their route selection, choosing the eastern path through Harper's Gap with modifications based significantly on the seasonal flooding data Victoria had provided. More surprising was the accompanying letter from Governor Harrison specifically acknowledging her contribution to the planning process. Mrs. Sullivan's insights regarding local conditions proved invaluable to our engineering assessment, he wrote. Her combination of meticulous record-keeping and practical knowledge exemplifies the kind of informed partnership that will build Colorado's future. Emmett read the letter aloud at supper, evident pride in his voice. "They're naming the planned Depot Sullivan Station," he added. "Construction begins next spring, with completion expected within 18 months. Victoria absorbed this news with characteristic composure, but genuine satisfaction warmed her voice. The railroad will transform the entire valley. Clearwater Junction will likely expand toward us as businesses develop around the depot." "Indeed," Emmett agreed, "which presents both opportunities and considerations for the Rocking S. I've been thinking we should establish a more formal headquarters for ranch operations, separate from our home. As the region develops, business matters will increasingly demand dedicated space." The "we" and "our" required no special emphasis. They had become natural expressions of their genuine partnership. What had begun as Emmett's individual enterprise, then evolved into shared management, now represented their mutual legacy and future vision. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching summer twilight paint the mountains in deepening purples, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment of contentment and purpose. The silver-haired woman, once deemed too old by men seeking younger, more biddable brides, had found her true value recognized by the one man wise enough to see beyond conventional expectations. "I received a letter from Mrs. Parker in Clearwater today," she mentioned. "Apparently Howard Green is actively seeking a new wife. His previous selection, a 20-year-old from St. Louis, returned east after just 3 months, finding mercantile life insufficiently stimulating." Emmett's low chuckle held genuine amusement rather than malice. Green never understood that age brings not limitation, but perspective. He sought youth believing it promised malleability, only to discover that inexperience often pairs with unrealistic expectations. "While I arrived with no expectations beyond basic security," Victoria observed, "anything more seemed impossible at my age." Emmett turned slightly to study her face in the fading light. "Yet you've achieved far more than security, Victoria. You've established yourself as an essential partner in the Rocking S, earned the governor's respect, and contributed significantly to regional development, all within a single year." The simple cataloguing of her accomplishments, delivered as statement of fact rather than exaggerated praise, reflected exactly why their partnership had flourished. Emmett consistently recognized Victoria's genuine contributions without diminishment or condescension, valuing her capabilities precisely because they matched his own standards of excellence, rather than despite her gender or age. "We've built something worthwhile together," she acknowledged, her hand finding his in the gathering darkness, "something neither of us could have created alone." As night settled over the Rocking S ranch, Victoria Sullivan, no longer merely a mail-order bride, but mistress of a prosperous ranch, respected community figure and cherished partner, understood with perfect clarity what her difficult journey had taught her. That silver hair wasn't evidence of diminished worth, but the visible manifestation of hard-won wisdom. And wisdom, when truly valued, could illumine a second chapter more meaningful than all that came before. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.